Buonasera, good evening, class. I hope you've all brought your homework because we've got midterms coming up soon, and I want to make sure I've got all your grades calculated before we get into that, so you know what you have to score. You did do the homework, right, everyone? I hope so. uh, I'm getting ahead of myself. First, we should probably do attendance. Lua, Lucky, are you in attendance today?
Here.
That's good. That's good. Did you prepare the homework, the
No, I
explanation
absolutely
of
did not.
who you are to the class in this combination, I guess, creative writing and programming, computer science, game design class?
I'm sorry, I did not prepare
That's cool. That's cool. Do you want to try and rattle one off the dome?
that. Hello. I'm Lou Lucky. I'm very tired today.
Why are you so
Um,
tired, Lua? What were you up all night doing? Partying? In the
Sleeping.
sorority, perhaps?
I
Okay.
slept for 12 hours and it still wasn't enough.
Wasn't enough. Harsh. Uh, Hello, everyone in the chat audience. Attendees, I should say, students. We've got Denshi double underscore. We've got Hawkbar, Aizvi Machina, Nueos is here, Penquin, and Renpona. And Millennium Cyborg. Wow, packed audience. Lecture hall is getting very crowded.
It's a small lecture hall.
Listen. Oh, Demi is here. Panko is here. Bon Bombs is here. Everyone's here. Maximum Crash is here. I have not submitted homework for several years. Godspeed, brother. Thank you, Maximum Crash. Stardust Crusader is here, who I know happens to be in actual school. Paper Joey, hello. Welcome, everyone.
My condolences to being in real school.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, and Denshi, again, flashing the cash. Now is not the... Denshi, did you bring enough for everyone? Otherwise, you can't have your cupcakes in class, unless you brought enough for the whole class. Cool. So, as everyone knows, today's lecture topic, this part of the course, is going to be about structuring your UI using the Unity game engine, a very, very popular, I want to say industry standard, but can't say industry standard game engine.
We can't move on until I address this.
Yeah.
Would your teachers actually just let you bring cupcakes in and then everyone gets cupcakes?
I have no
Or
fucking
did
idea.
no one ever try?
I'm just rattling teacher tropes off the dome. I have no idea.
Because people at my school frequently just brought cupcakes so that they didn't have to do work, and it worked every time.
Wait, what? What do you mean? Brought cupcakes so they didn't have to do? You mean like for group projects, or what do you mean?
No. Okay, normal class day. Person says, I really don't want to do anything in government today. They make a ton of cupcakes and bring them to government class and said, I brought cupcakes for the class. We spend 30 minutes of the class eating cupcakes. This happened in many classes frequently for me.
That's awesome.
I didn't do it, but I had friends that did it, and then other people did it. This was a very normal thing. But I wondered how normal it is. Surely most schools don't accept this.
Is this like in? Well, you said government, so it can't. I was gonna say.
This is
Oh,
high school.
This is high school. Okay, this is. Okay. No, I can't say I've ever had that experience, though.
Okay. You sparked a memory in me. Specifically, Farah did this quite a lot, actually.
No, the did you bring enough for the class is like an elementary school thing I was thinking of. It's like,
Yes.
you're, chewing your candy or whatever very obnoxiously and the teacher wants to call you out. Unless you brought enough
Yes.
for the whole class.
I know it's supposed to be an admonishing thing, but it was taken quite literally at my school, I think.
I see. Alright, so, Lua, what is your background with the begrudgingly industry standard Unity game engine?
I have quite the background. I've been using Unity for, my gosh, 6 years now.
That's cool.
UI's a little odd. I have a tenuous grasp on anchoring, and
I'm told you're kind of quiet. Hold on, let me boost you.
Oh no.
That's my fault, not yours.
Should I start yelling?
Please don't. Please don't. We're right next to the library. Please don't. Okay, I boosted you. You've been boosted.
Yeah, everyone loves Unity.
I'm grading your voice on a curve right now.
Oh no.
Yeah. Okay, so you've been using it for 6 years, and the way that they build
Unity never did anything wrong is a factually untrue statement.
Yeah, Denshi, you can't go spreading lies like that. So, yeah. As for me, I've been using Unity for about a decade now, I think.
My gosh.
Which doesn't make me an expert, it just makes me foolhardy. I'm very set in my probably suboptimal non-best practices. I learned it in college, just like most people, because it's the egalitarian game engine of champions. And then in 2020, they went public and became a publicly traded company. And it is from then that Unity died. Unity died that day, which is why, as we'll see in a little bit, I will be talking about this from the perspective of Unity 2019.2 LTS. Yeah, long-term
and
support.
I'll be using 2019.4.
Yeah, maybe it's 4. Maybe it's 0.4. I don't remember. But it's Unity 2019, the last version of Unity that I acknowledge, because everything after that has been rough. They went public in 2020, and as every company does when they go public, they basically imploded. They became beholden to stockholder profit, which means that they desperately had to change focus every time stockholders thought of a fad. So there are lots of half-completed features that have been abandoned that don't work anymore, and generally things that most independent developers don't care for, like integration into gambling mechanics and things like that. They recently bought Ironforge, which are DRM peddlers, which is very, very concerning. So I will be using a version of Unity that comes before all of that happened, and pretend like they're still a privately owned company that have done nothing wrong. Denshi, I am going to remove you from the class if you keep speaking out of turn like that. God, I absolutely cannot wait for native NFT integration is a thing only a deranged person would ever say. Native Unity
I have
apes.
teachers that actually genuinely probably would kick you out of class for saying something like that.
Yeah. Millennium Cyborg says, Unity lets me program my graphics pipeline in C#, so I still love it. Millennium Cyborg, you are the only indie person I know on this beautiful planet that actually makes use of the scriptable render pipeline.
Yeah.
I cannot be bothered. I don't want to have to think about how my things render. That's why I'm using a game engine. If I wanted
Same.
to write rendering code, I would make my own engine.
Yep.
That's how I feel about this.
I would argue that's one of the Unity's greatest points is that I don't have to touch anything related to graphics. I just throw a bunch of post-processing volumes on it. It's great.
Yes. Okay. So with all of that out of the way, I have to say that I don't really condone the direction Unity is going in, but as I've established, I'm very, very set in my ways. It's good at what it is, which is a C# engine that has 3D and 2D rendering capabilities. It builds to a host of platforms, Mac, Linux, web, Android, iOS, PC, of course. So I really can't get too upset about it. I want to learn Godot, because it's also a C# engine, but I never have the time. Every project that I start is important to me, and I'm never like, oh, well, if I just end up not being able to make this work in time, that's fine. Next time we do a game jam, perhaps the next VTuber game jam, I will try and use Godot instead of Unity, I think, is my plan.
Yeah, who wants to run a VTuber game jam?
Yeah, who would do that? Who would do that?
No, genuinely. Is anyone in the audience want to run a VTuber game jam?
Fair enough. Then she says, I'm
For
told
me?
the C
Would you like to take over the server?
Yeah. Then she says the C# support is mediocre.
It's
and
it's almost non-existent.
Really? Okay.
Unusable.
In that case, there's not much that we can do then. And then Maximum Crash says Godot is absolutely my next step. I hear you. I hear you. Okay. So, I guess we'll begin lecture. We're, what, 15 minutes into class? 12 minutes into class? You all set, Lou? Are you ready to take notes? You got your copybook all out? This will be on the exam, so make sure
I
you're
can't. I
studying.
probably should actually take notes.
If you want.
My notebook
I
is
could do the
full.
lazy professor thing and say, like, and the slide deck will be dispersed on Blackboard afterwards, and every student checks out as soon as they hear that.
This is true.
But at least I didn't make you buy a textbook.
Yet.
Yet.
Wow, this notebook's completely full. I need to get a new one.
This recording will be posted on twitch.tv. It will be uploaded to my YouTube unless something terrible and compromising happens on this VOD. This will just get posted to my YouTube tomorrow.
Oh no! I've written my social security number into the Unity UI.
Oh shit. Stardust
Okay,
Crusader
ready?
Zero says, one of my professors this semester is a YouTuber. That's cool. That's very cool. But until
Love
you get to
that.
have a class taught by a live 2D avatar, what's the point? Bond
One of
says
my
Unity
professors
permissions
named
lost.
all of our project groups after Metal Gear games.
That's fun. You told me
I
about
was,
that, I think.
Phantom Pain,
Mm-mm.
which was accurate to the group structure.
Ren says, so what you're saying is that it won't be on YouTube. I guess that's not what I'm saying at all. This should be on YouTube tomorrow. And again, unless I have to edit the VOD, in which case the edited form of the VOD.
Perms lost.
Yeah, Unity perms lost. Alright. You all set?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you want to learn the Unity UI. Good luck. I'm going to walk you through a timeline here. So it is June 2005. Unity has just
we're getting a whole
released
history.
the definitive UI solution called ImGUI. It is August 2014. Unity has just released the definitive UI solution, Unity UI. It is October 2021. Unity has just released the definitive UI solution, UI Toolkit. So, on our timeline, Unity 1.0 launches with ImGUI. Unity 4.6 in 2017 releases with Unity UI. And then in 2021.2, we released the UI Toolkit. We are here. Unity 2019 LTS, Long-Term Support Edition. This is the, last version of Unity 2019. It is stable. All known bugs, roughly, have been hammered out of it. So that's where we're at. But we're continuing to move forward. I anticipate by 2025, if Unity is still around, there will be a fourth definitive UI solution. They do this a lot with a lot of features, where it's the same with rendering, where they're like, alright, we've got our rendering pipeline all set. Next week, alright, there's the scriptable render pipeline. Oh, no, actually, sorry. Before that, there's the default rendering pipeline, and they had the high-def HD RP rendering pipeline, and then after that, they introduced the scriptable rendering pipeline, which makes the previous one obsolete. And now you can use standard or scriptable, I think. They do this a lot. And as Denshi points out, they change up how they do networking for multiplayer games all the time.
Oh, love that. There was a kid at my school who was a genuine Unity fanboy, and he went to the, I don't know what they would call it. It was a Unity Connect or something. He went to the Unity, conference.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he just went to GDC and he only cared about Unity. I can't really remember. But I remember we came back to class, and I was in the game development club, and he got in front of the club and was like, "You guys, Unity is changing the game. They're adding scriptable thing." And he went on. He went on for literally 45 minutes.
That rules.
And I was like,
I wish
so
I could have that
great.
kind of enthusiasm about anything in life. That rules. Panko says, wow, they went from Unity 4 to Unity 2021? That's a lot of versions. You're not wrong. And can you believe the only native toon shader back then was HDRP? I only learned how to write my own shaders in 2019, so I know very little about that. All right. So, we've got our three different kinds of UIs here. I'm going to give you a brief rundown of what each of them is all about. First one is ImGUI. It stands for Immediate GUI, Graphic User Interface. It is totally stateless. The UI is re-rendered from scratch every single tick of the update loop. The entire process flow for every button that appears on the screen and every UI element must be strictly defined in an update loop as a result. So you define your button, you then have to define what happens when you click the button, what happens when you hover the button. All of this is defined inside the update loop, rather than being its own separate component. The Unity Editor GUI is actually still defined this way. This is what they use for their own internal program, which is fine, because that's totally fine. One of Unity's strong points is the ability to modify editor code, I think. You can write your own widgets and menus and stuff for Unity very, very easily. Yunwa, hello. Thank you for the subscription. Tell me about the data and details, Skeleton Friend. I will try my best. So yeah, you can modify Unity's editor using this process. It's nice, it's intuitive, and it doesn't get compiled into your deployable code, which is very nice. So yeah, you can and will use this to make custom inspectors. And it looks like this, if I move my head out of the way. Very 2000s, I guess. Very 2010s. It's beveled and smooth and shiny, and I don't know how you make it not look like this. What was that?
My company uses ImGUI too.
Well, again, it's good for debug stuff. All of the Unity's debug menus are in this way too. Like if you enable development build on your application, when it crashes, it will pop up a ImGUI menu with console output and everything like that. So it's got its purpose. It's fine. It's very difficult to make this appealing, and you basically can only work with this if you're a programmer, because you have to define every aspect of your UI in code. It's all C#. Or I guess back at the time it could have been JavaScript as well, because Unity used to support JavaScript, and they don't anymore. But yeah, you'd have to be a programmer to know what you're doing, which is fine, because, This was an engine made by a couple of people in a garage back in 2014 or whatever I said. So now we've got Unity UI, which is known as UGUI. Don't get these confused. So this is game object and component based, just like everything else in Unity.
Hell yeah.
So you can physically assemble your UI in a canvas object in the scene. You snap them together like building blocks. The components can retain stateful information about the UI, so you don't have to worry about flushing everything every update. You can save that data to a game object. It will remember it next time you need to query it. Very, very useful. It's very easy to plug and play, visually oriented. The process flow can be connected across objects using what are known as Unity events. They're delegates. And it looks like this. Here's from the plugin that I've been building. Here's an example of a big hierarchy where we've got our UI defined in terms of game objects that are all nested under each other underneath the canvas. Much, much easier and more visually oriented than the ImGUI. Also, I believe ImGUI wouldn't render in editor because it would need to be running in the update loop. So here you can actually see what it looks like ahead of time. And then finally, the one everybody wants to know about, UI Toolkit. I have no idea what UI Toolkit is all about. This is too new for me. I am far too set in my ways to learn a third new way to do something. Sorry, but not really that sorry. I am told from people in the know that it's similar to HTML with CSS. And Unity themselves provide this very helpful table, which I will abridge for you. UGUI, which is the thing we were just looking at, is well suited for UI positioned in a lit and 3D world, for visual effects and shaders on the materials, and for easy referencing from mono behaviors, which I would assume you always want your UI to do. I don't know when you'd want your UI to be difficult to reference from your game logic, but that's just me. What do I know? And then the UI toolkit here is an alternative to UGUI if you want to create a screen overlay that is very scalable, but it is basically textureless, flat, kind of like a Skeletom thing, I think. Oh, hold on, I gotta move you. Your head is blocking the blackboard. Not your fault, though. 1 second, let me pop into studio mode and drag you down. There you go. You're all set. You don't have to tilt. You're fine. I fixed it. Take a seat, little Lucky. Don't stand in class. All right. So yeah, basically, it's like for scaling. It doesn't seem like it's a replacement, just an alternative, which is kind of even weirder, because then you could have two concurrent UI systems running in parallel in your game potentially. I don't really know why you want to do this. Oh wait, hold on. Where is? All right, Louis, your head is currently blocking your own name, but that's fine. You don't have to tilt. It's fine. Unless we've lost Louis. I mean, if you want to do it, that's fine. Getting dragged into the grave. When you're making an auth UI, perhaps, says Nuo. What do you mean by that in terms of why you'd want to use this? What do you mean by an auth UI? Who was sleeping in class? That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Back to the slide deck, right? So, the root of all of this, in a very literal sense, is the canvas. Let's talk about it. It is the root object under which all elements will be children. For folks who are not as in the know, what this just means is that you have a element at the top level, and then things are children of it, which means that they follow around the parent. You attach children to the parent, and so you move the parent, the children move in unison. And there are 3 render modes for this canvas. This is very important. People ask me very frequently what these different things are. So the first render mode is overlay. This means that once Unity is done rendering your entire frame, compositing all of your cameras together, if you have multiple cameras, etc., doing post-processing, then the UI will be rendered on top of that final frame. Makes sense. That's definitely what you think of when you think of UI. The second alternative, which is very similar but not quite, is overlay of a specific camera. Once again, if you have multiple cameras, this might be useful because you can get one to render on top of your UI, while the other is, behind it. Very good, very good. And the third one is completely perpendicular orthographic to all of these, which is world space. And now your canvas is no longer treated as a thing rendering over your viewport. It is actually a physical 3D object that you can move around in 3D space. You can rotate it, you can attach it to an object, you can cast light onto it. It is treated as a normal game object for all intents and purposes, but you can use canvas methods on it. This is very useful if you say, have the player's name floating above their head in a first-person shooter, or diegetic UI like a PDA that's on your wrist or something like that. This is when
Or
you'd
if
want
you're
to use
making a
world
VR
space.
game.
Hmm?
Or if you're making a VR game.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's when you want to use world space. And then there are 3 scaling modes for each of these 3 render modes, so you can have, I think, 9 possibilities overall. You can scale with your screen size, which means to say 1 screen unit is equal to 1 pixel relative to the resolution that you specify in this mode. By default, it is 800 by 600. So if your screen is, 1600 by 1200, every screen unit would be 2 pixels, etc., etc. There is constant pixel size, which just means that 1 screen unit is 1 pixel no matter what. If your screen is twice the size of what you're working with in Unity, then tough. This is probably not great if you think you have a chance that you may be working with 4K monitors or something ultra high res, because what you're working with that looks usable might in fact not be usable at all for a way higher resolution if their DPI is very, very high. And then the third option, which I have never messed with, but I know what it does, is constant physical size, where 1 screen unit can be defined in millimeters, points, inches, pica, whatever you use in like Photoshop or Illustrator. This is very dependent on specifying the correct DPI of the screen you're working on. I would think this is only useful for installation pieces like kiosks, where you know the exact specs that you're working with, or maybe like the Nintendo Switch, where you have a guaranteed kind of screen size that you're dealing with. Does that make sense? And yeah, Denji is Pika, P-I-C-A. Lua, how much of this do you already know before I prattle on further?
Pretty much all of it, but I do forget some bits.
Okay, cool. And of course, you can have multiple canvases in a scene. This is important. You can have a canvas of every single one of these modes all competing with each other. You can have 100 world space canvases, etc., etc. Panko says, did you know? Pika is dick in Portuguese. Now you know. Panko, I'm going to have to remove you from the class if you keep this up. That's fine. That's totally cool. Okay, and so the way that the canvas rendering works in most cases is the lowest child on the hierarchy gets rendered on top of everything. It basically does rendering from the top down. Imagine it like a for loop. It will iterate over every child, render the child, then render the next one, etc., etc. So if you need to have things overlapping each other, it doesn't actually use the z value of the object. It will just use the order in the list. Good things to know. So, that brings us to chapter 1 here, the mechanics.
Woo.
Yeah. We're not talking about your granddad's game object transform anymore. We're dealing with the future. This is the rect transform. It is subtly different than the transform you may know for game objects. Game objects have position, rotation, scale, and we kind of have something similar here. It looks like this. So you'll notice that we do have position, and we have scale, and we have rotation, but we also have width, and anchors, and pivot, and all of this good stuff. Thank you. So the position vector here is not based on the same kind of scaling that your game objects in your world space are. They are based on, we were just talking about the canvas space. So if you have a constant pixel size, these would be in pixels. Same with width and height. That is 160 pixels by 100 pixels. yeah. We have our width and height in addition to scale.
But those values, if you're not using constant pixel size, what is that just an arbitrary Unity unit?
So going back to our scaling types here, if you are using scales with screen size, it is multiplied by whatever your resolution is currently a factor of the native
But that
resolution.
value right there is a screen unit, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, hold on, I'm gonna pivot back.
I believe there's a way to do conversions between them, right? But I've never quite understood what exactly that actual value is.
So again, 1 screen unit is just 1 pixel unless, I'll pop open Unity here, you are doing something like what I do, where you have in the corner here, I hope this is visible behind my giant bulbous head, our canvas scaler, which is what I was just talking about. I tell this to scale with screen size, and my reference resolution is actually 400 by 600, so it's tall, because that's the way that I've got my app set up. So if I were to run this at 800 by 1200, then the unit there would be 2 pixels. So then going back to my slide deck, which is here, which is where? this example would be 6 pixels offset from the left. Similarly, if I was running at 200 by 300, a value of 3 here would correspond to 1.5 pixels. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So that's how screen units and canvas units correspond to something you can think about in reality.
I get to see
They're
your
not.
background. It's so cute.
Oh, my tortoise. Yeah. I didn't realize it keeps flashing. But that's a college professor classic, flashing the desktop and having it be like a vacation photo or something, right?
All of my professors had interesting ones.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not arbitrary. It might feel random and arbitrary, but these actually do relate directly to a pixel size on your screen, unless you choose that physical size, in which case these relate to the physical size on your screen.
One of the problems I've come across a lot is like having a normal transform and trying to turn it into whatever the rect transform position is.
You're saying converting from world space to screen space?
Yeah.
So you're trying to find the point on the screen that a 3D object that's not on your canvas is currently happening, is that correct?
It was in a canvas. I don't know why it didn't have a rect. I can't remember exactly what I was doing.
Interesting.
Issues.
Yeah, moving a game object. Who's that? Lamp Devil's rating. Thank you, Lamp Devil. You're just in time for possibly the main event. We just got to the mechanics section of our lecture here. For all of the raiders, we are talking about how to build a functional UI in Unity 3D. Hello, welcome. I'm here with Lua Lucky, my #1 student. The main event, yeah. You're here in time for the main event. So Lua, moving a traditional game object into the canvas does not automatically make it a rect
Yeah,
transform.
that's not what I was doing. I
Okay.
can't remember what the problem was.
Okay. If you want to come to office hours, Wednesdays and Fridays.
Oh yeah, I'll bring my laptop.
Cool. Okay, so width and height, we have in addition to scale. And again, these units are not arbitrary. They're relative to the pixel conversion to screen space that we talked about in the previous slide. We also have these anchor and pivot points. Now, these are not pixel values. These are values from 1 to 0, or 0 to 1. And you have to think about them in terms of percentages of the screen, height and width, which can make it kind of awkward if you want to have something in a very specific place. You have to figure out, I guess, how many pixels offset that is. But generally speaking, you'll most likely be using 0, 1, and 0.5. Yeah, you don't want to use anchors to position stuff. That's not what they're for. That really is what pause X and pause Y are for. So the anchor is the point in the canvas, the point on the canvas against which the offsets are calculated, and the pivot is the point on the transform itself against which offsets are calculated. I'm going to take you in MS Paint here to kind of show you what I mean, because unless you have a web dev background, this might be kind of confusing. So the black lines here are the canvas, and say we've got our point in the corner. We're going to anchor this to 0, 0, which is the example that we used. So our anchor is this red dot right here. Then we have our transform. I will make it orange. I will make it purple. That's what we're going to do. So we have our rect transform here. It's like this. Cool. A great container. Its pivot, not like the example I used, I probably should have done this, is going to be at 0.5, 0.5, right in the center. So that means that in the example that I have, I'll now use green. The value of 3 offset that I have is calculated. 1 second. I'm confused. Bon just told me to check chat, and I'm not sure why. I'm sorry, I totally got derailed. Bon was like waving her arms around. No. I'm not artistically inclined enough. Okay, Bon, you made it sound like there was like a disaster happening. Totally derailed me. Okay, so our anchor point here on the canvas is 0, 0, top corner, right? 0% of the way down the y-axis, 0% of the way across the x-axis. And our anchor point, or our pivot point for the transform is 0.5, 0.5, which means that the offset is going to be calculated like such, and then like such, basically. So each of these would be say, the value that we have. If you wanted to do it instead, you could have your pivot also be 0, 0 on the rect transform, and then your value would specify, like, that. That's what you're measuring to. That's what the value of the 3 and -3 here represent. We're going 3 over on the x-axis, down 3 on the y-axis, until we get to that pivot point. The pivot point and the anchor point are this distance apart. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So you don't want to use the anchors or the pivots to position things. You want to try and make sure you're using the position x and y. There are a couple helpful prefabs in here, presets, for the anchors and pivots. You can do like all the corners. You can also have ones where it stretches instead of having a fixed width or fixed height or either. You can have it stretch, which would be that your anchors are, I think, what is it? Should be 0 to 1, or I think your anchors are 0.5, 0.5, and your pivots also 0.5, 0.5, something like that. It's a helpful preset. I don't often like having stuff that stretches, but that's very useful for scalable UI. Anyway, that's how you think about anchors and pivots. They are the points at which offset calculations for position are calculated. Now, these are very important. I only learned about these halfway through my tenure working with Unity. These components are your best friends in this cruel world of UGUI. The first one, the content size fitter. This guy is very, very underrated. It's the content size fitter. Does what it says on the tin. It basically shrink wraps a container, so it overrides the height and width of the rect transform that you assign this to basically shrink wrap the height and width of all of the children that are parented under it. So that's very, very helpful if you have a text box or something like that, where you can attach this to text, and the text object will only have the height and width of however much text you put into it. The other one is the layout group. In this case, I have a vertical layout group. So here, this will automatically control the position of a child element, and it specifies things like padding, spacing, alignment. You can align them to the center, the left, right, etc. You can have each element in the list be, 10 pixels, screen space units away from each other, pad them 10 on each side. Very, very good. And, oops, sorry. And yeah, so these two are your bread and butter when you're building UI, I think, in Unity. Everything you build should probably have one or both of these on them, in all cases that I've dealt with so far. So the content size fitter, like I said, it does what it says on the tin. You can put it on a text mesh and it'll make the text object shrink to be only as wide as the actual letters that you put in the text. Very handy, neat trick. You can chain these together in a hierarchical relationship for as many layers as you need. So you can have a text object that has a content size fitter inside of a container that has its own content size fitter, and each one will shrink wrap to the previous, so you can have like padding and such like that. And again, it looks like this. Horizontal unconstrained means that it will not shrink to the size of the child, but vertical fit to preferred size means it will be only as tall as the children you put in it. Does this make sense?
Two options?
Yes, I think it's that, minimum size and preferred size. I don't know what minimum size does. Preferred size seems to get the goods. Sensei, a question, says Denshi. Yes, I will accept questions. What's up? Denshi, don't keep me waiting. Denshi. Are you saying we just change around the options until it looks good? Pretty much, yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah, pretty much. But you can make informed guesses about how the options might need to be changed with these tips, is pretty much what I'm getting at.
Wow.
I'm excited for the next slide.
Are you? Because you hate layout groups? Do these not work for you?
Here is the true bane of my existence, Tom.
Yeah.
Those last three options.
Good, I explained what they do here.
Good.
You pretty much don't want to mess with them. So, yeah, this.
Apparently not, because sometimes I have to.
I'll explain when you do and don't want to mess with them. In my experience, I don't mess with them, but I guess there could be reasons why you do. So, the padding values, left, right, bottom, top, etc., I feel like are self-evident. This is if you have a list.
Yeah, Denshi gets it.
Yeah. If you have a list, this will move everything 10 pixels from the side of the list. I think it's intuitive. There are 3 very
Shoot.
important settings at the bottom.
I have a
Control child.
question,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Instead of using those, do you just use a content size fitter even though it tells you should just use those options?
We'll get to that. Yes. The short
Okay.
answer is yes. Pretty much yes. Okay. So there's control child size, which is a very tersely phrased Boolean, which is basically asking, does the layout manager control the size or just the position of the child? I pretty much always want them to just control the position.
Okay, I need to parse this. This is the most important part of this entire
Yeah,
stream
probably.
for me, Tom. You have no idea.
So
Does the layout manager control the size or just the position of the children? Okay, so it's always gonna control the position.
yes, you will always. The layout manager will always align things in the order that you specify, offset by the amount that you specify. But if you let the layout manager control the size, it will like squish them, I believe.
And that option, okay, so let's say I have child force expand
Mhm.
checked, but not child control child size.
Yes.
Will that do nothing?
Let's find out. So there's the use
Okay.
child scale, which is do you want the scale factor of the child to factor into the size it's understanding the element to be? So like when it's laying things out, it'll say, okay, this child is 40 pixels tall, and we're told to do a 10 pixel buffer padding. Now we need to move down 50 pixels, and that's the position of the next child. If for some reason you didn't want the child scale to factor into that, like if you had a child that was 2x local scale, which would make it effectively 80 pixels tall, and you for some reason wanted the next element to also still render 50 pixels below, you would uncheck these. You'll notice in my example here, I actually have these unchecked, but that's because I've never dealt with a child where the scale is less than 1 or different than 1. I pretty much...
When you say 1, that's percentage, right?
Huh?
When you're talking about scale, what do you mean considering that a rect transform scale is...
So going
not
all the way
0 to
back
1?
here, the scale is still...
You're talking about that scale?
Yes.
That's
Yes, yes, yes.
insane.
Yes, exactly. So in my example, I have them unchecked, but I think you'd pretty much always want them checked. The only reason I have them unchecked is because I'm always dealing with a scale of 1, and there's no perceptible difference in that sense. But if I were to make things shrink based on the scale rather than the size, you would want that.
Okay. So when it says use child scale, it does not refer to the size of the child, but literally the scale
Yeah.
factor.
So again, if you have a child that's 40 pixels tall and a scale of 2, effectively that is 80 pixels tall. But if you
But
uncheck
it is
these
still
boxes,
40 pixels tall, quote unquote.
yeah, but if you uncheck these boxes, the layout group will consider it to be 40 pixels tall when assigning the position of the next child. If you check
I never
this,
touch a scale. I see no reason to.
exactly, that's how I feel as well. I do not think scale is an appropriate way to deal with a hierarchical situation like this. It seems like it would only cause more problems, especially if you have chained stuff all the way down, because obviously children inherit the scale of their parent, so the scale is relative to the scale of the parent, and then if you've got a child that's a scale of 2 and it has elements that have a scale of 3, now those things are 6 times bigger than they originally were. It's a whole can of worms.
We've confused Denshi. I call that a win.
That's pretty good. And so the last one is child force expand, which is does the layout group force the child elements to expand to fill any remaining space. You can sometimes have this for like width, but not height. I can give an example of this working if you want to see it, or if you want to try and mess around, we can flip over to you if you'd like.
I know this. I know what it does.
Okay.
But if folks, I want to know how this relates to control child size.
Okay.
Like, will this do anything if control child size is unchecked?
Do you want to mess around and find out?
I guess we're gonna let's fuck around and find out.
All right. We are now watching Lua's wonderful...
Oh, are we? I'm doing.
I thought that's what you were gonna do. I thought you wanted to
Oh,
mess around with
okay.
it.
I forgot.
Oh,
that
hold on.
It was even
The way you've
screen
got
share.
the way you've got screen share set up is flipping to
Oh.
the inspector every time you tab over to it.
I
That's very
have
funny.
no control over
No, you
that.
can't. Okay, I can control this if you want. That's fine.
Uh,
I have.
I
used it
have.
before.
Yeah, I unfortunately have literally no control over that.
The alternative would be you Discord screen share your entire desktop, which is not a reasonable thing
I'm
to
not
ask you
doing
to do.
that. Wait,
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
I'm showing the wrong thing.
Okay.
No, I'm showing you this.
No, you're showing me the right thing, but the way Unity treats window capture is that the hierarchy thing over here is its own window, the projects tab is its own window, the inspector is its own window, and every one of these things is its own window.
Perhaps Discord sharing Unity in the first place was a fool's errand.
Yeah, it's fine. That's okay. Worth a shot. So here I've got my plugin that I've been soldering away on for the better part of a year. And this is entirely a UI project. There's no actual game here. I am basically using Unity to render a UI using all of these tips and tricks that I'm talking about. So, let's see an example, perhaps. Like this guy. I think I...
Sorry, I hiccuped.
Oh, that's Hiccup. I thought you were exclaiming in delight as I was about to show you a cool...
I was squealing in delight at this Unity UI.
So let's see, what do I have here? So in my vertical layout group here, which has the button, text, and input field in it, I have everything disabled. Child control size, no. Use child scale, no. Expand, force child expand, no. Literally all I want this to do is say these things are these positioned in a vertical way from each other. So that if I add more buttons, we can just go. And that's the content size fitter that this whole thing is using, automatically rescaling in accordance to the layout group becoming
I love
larger.
that you see, because I used to try to follow the little Unity warning. It says you're using a content size fitter. Why would you do that when we have all this beautiful layout stuff for you? And I said, oh, okay, Unity. Oh, okay, I must be doing something wrong.
This thing right here?
I must be doing something wrong. I'll remove the content size fitter and I'll use your stupid checkboxes.
This thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a whole slide about that.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So you can actually... the reason it is advising you to do this is because in a runtime situation, having multiple content size fitters chained together with a layout group will actually cause like a jump in your UI every time it dynamically rescales. But there is code you can execute that will make it do that before it renders, which I will include in the slide as well.
Why do they not do it?
I'm assuming it's very unperformant, but if you're only doing a UI or doing anything short of a AAA game, that doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I think, anyway. Okay.
I'm in so much pain.
The other
Unity
answer is
UI
because they've
wants
already
me to
moved on to
die.
the new hotness, which is the Unity UI toolkit. So who needs to make this performant or look good? It's just the thing that everybody uses. Okay, so child control size. Let's check that to yes. Awesome. That has made my button 0 width, which you probably have experienced many times before, yes?
Yes.
So let's see. What's the correct way to fix this, if I remember?
How do you fix... this is a tangent. How do I fix a button that has gone reverse inverted like that with the red X?
That just means it has a size of 0 or negative. I say just like it's, not a big deal. I think. Now I get to see if I can remember.
Delete everything and start over. I literally just Control Z.
So.
Or start over, yeah.
I think basically what you want is you always want these two in tandem. I think. Because if you're telling it to control the size, but you're not telling it to force expand, it doesn't have a reference for what the size should be.
Yeah.
I think. So, like, when I turn this on, it's good. When I turn this off, it's saying, okay, well, we're controlling the width. To what end? I don't really know why these are separate.
Okay.
But I guess you could do something like... No, I don't know. Perhaps if the... No, I actually don't know. Pretty much you're always going to want...
Okay, so you always want them to be both either on or off.
Yeah. And now that I've pressed all my buttons, you're talking about the same wonderful state where it sets things to 0. You want this to be like back to 30.
Well,
it doesn't clean up after itself.
0 is a fortunate situation. What happens to me is that it completely flips over and is like off the screen in red.
Yeah, like this, right? Negative 30, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So Unity does a poor job of cleaning up after itself. If you tell it to like control height and then tell it to not control height, it will just leave it as it had it, which was at 0. So no good.
So the lesson you're telling me is that I should just know the height and width of all my elements.
Yes. And thanks to the magic of prefabs, nested prefabs, that's much more feasible than it sounds.
That's fair.
Everything I have in this app, for example, is a height of 30. Like everything. So it's very, very easy for me. Every border is 10 margins, a 10 pixel margin. Every element is a 30 pixel height, etc., etc. and then the containers they're in are all 320 pixels, 350 pixels, something like that. So it's very, very easy for me to remember these things. But yeah, so that's basically how you'd use these things. As you can see, I've got a like canvas scaler at the top here, my content size fitter, and a vertical layout group working in tandem, so that
Use horizontal layout groups
I can.
here?
In here, I don't think I do. I think for like the input field, I think I manually positioned these. But you certainly could.
So, does your program is your program capable of changing the window size?
You can only scale it to be multiples of the resolution it currently is. You can't stretch it to be wider.
Huh.
Which is a deliberate design choice because of UI considerations like this. But if I wanted it to be dynamic, I think, like if I do game 4x3, yeah, so like parts of it are designed to stretch, like the scroll bar, but for the rest of it I have to be set to a very specific size. If I wanted this to be a different size or to be scalable, what I would do, instead of specifying a width here, I would say stretch, and it's going to do this, which is not great. We do that, and oh, wait, okay. So this is multiple components fighting each other, is what's happening here. I've totally derailed from my lecture. So the content here.
No, this is exactly what I need to know, Tom.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So these are driven by a content size fitter. I told it to stretch, but I also told it that it's got a content size fitter. So that's why it's getting very confused. We can turn that off, and I think we can make this stretch. Maybe? Oh, I'm also looking at an invisible element. Hold on, there's a lot of things wrong with what I'm trying to show you right now. Let's go here. This is the actual element. Threshold, right here. So here, if we wanted this to
because everything you're saying is fine and dandy if your program never really changes size, but I want to make a program that scales.
Okay. So what's happening here? We have our vertical layout group, and we're telling it to not control size or force child to expand. I can make it force child expand and control child size, and then they stretch, because the actual thing here is stretched, and so now it's got a instead of a height and width, you now define offsets from the sides. So like I could do like that and like that, and now if I go to my game and I can do free aspect ratio, I can stretch this around, and it's not great because all the content in these children are set to a specific resolution, but they do kind of scale. Let me undo all this.
Yeah.
It's a chore. Getting scalable UI is definitely a chore.
Yeah, I would imagine that in actuality you'd want to do this with anchors, right?
Yeah. So let's
rather than setting a set 100 100.
Yeah. So let's start fresh, shall we? Let's make a component, the basis of all UI stuff, a game object, a panel. Currently it is stretched. There is let's add a 10 pixel margin on each side, like such. You can free aspect this, and it'll stretch. I'm being laughed at. That's awesome. Okay, so you can do something like that. Now we want to put text in here. That's well and good. We have to assign a font asset. Let's do Noto Sans because that's go-to text. Unity will default, of course, push this somewhere fucking nonsense. You always disregard that, and we want to put this in the panel, right in the center. Okay, so now we've got our pivot point and anchors of 0.5 all the way around, which means that this is dead center, and its position is defined against 0.5 of the
So I know
canvas.
you went over this a lot. Okay, yeah, never mind.
So if I were to change my anchor on the canvas to 0, you can see Unity will automatically try and compensate for its position. But now it's saying that the offset is relative to here.
Anchors are scary.
Anchors are scary, which means that if I set this back to 0,
So position and left and right and all those things are all relative to the anchors.
Yes, exactly. So we've set our anchor now to 0.
I'm assuming position is relative to the pivot. No. Yes?
Yes. It's relative to
Okay.
both. The distance between the anchor point and the pivot point is what the distance you're calculating here is.
Sorry,
So,
calculating where? I actually can't see Unity, so I'm watching the screen.
oh, am I not? I am sharing Unity, am I not?
You are not.
Oh, not to you. That's right.
Not to
Sorry.
me.
Sorry. Do you want me to change that?
For now, we're gonna be in Unity, yeah.
Okay, 1 second. My mistake. Now I gotta remember to put the slide deck back on. Options.
I'll remind you.
Is there a way I can change it? Oh yeah, here we are. Change window. Where is it giving me the option? Screen. Congratulations, Lua. You get to see my entire desktop because, as we just established, there's not a better way to do this.
Oh, yeah, because Unity sharing.
Go ahead. Enjoy. Okay, so what we have here is we've set our anchor to 0, 0, like such. My position is now a big number, but because I've got my anchor 0, 0 and my pivot of 0.5, it's measuring a distance of 0 across the x from pivot to anchor. If I make this 100, you can see the Unity's even
Oh,
stronger.
right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, right.
So,
the pivot is the position on the object
Yes.
which you're comparing against.
You're
and
doing the anchor
anchors
to
are
the pivot.
Place on the screen you're comparing.
If I make
against.
the pivot point of this
or
text
at least the
0,
parent.
and I set my x to 0, it behaves like you might expect, where they're now one and the same. 100.
Why would you ever want to use position Z?
Position what?
Why would you ever want to use position Z?
I don't know. I don't know why it's an option. Don't think it factors into rendering. So, like, if I do... Oh, this is a poor example because these are, like... Let me change the font color here. Okay, so if I slide this around in the Z, it doesn't matter. So I don't really know why there's a position Z here. It matters for, like, world space canvas and things like that, but not here. Here it's just the last thing in the canvas is rendered last. Hierarchy based.
Then she confirms.
Yeah, not particularly useful here for most purposes. So another note about the pivot, though. We've set our pivot to 0.5, which is like right here, I think. Which means that if we rotate this thing around the z-axis, it will rotate around the pivot and not the dead center. So 0.5 is a good smart person's pivot. Then you have to basically just factor in the width of your element when you're figuring out where it needs to go. So we're saying this is a width of 400. Let's give it a offset of 200, and then we can still rotate it around its center like we'd expect. A lot of this is just knowing numbers and figuring out how they relate to each other. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You got to figure out your widths. You got to have your widths to figure out offsets, things like that, etc., etc. Does that make sense? Does this align with your understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to get back to slides, or do you have any further questions in the hands-on portion here? And we can get back to this at the end as well.
We'll come back.
Okay. Are there any questions in my chat? Oh my god, that was painful. What's up, Panko? Am I ripping teeth out of your skull right now? Alright, and now Lua, I will give you back the presentation. My number one student. Alright, applications. Which one of these is this one? There we go. Back to the slide deck, I think. Please.
Images.
Hold on. Discord is now, or my OBS is not detecting my slide deck anymore.
Oh no!
1 second. It's probably because it's changed names. That's really weird. Why didn't it pick that up?
Now, Denshi, why didn't you go to the toilet during the break?
It's a great question. Asking the important questions.
It is a weird question considering it's I guess some people try to go to the toilet to avoid class. But like, if you need to go to the toilet, you need to go to the toilet.
Okay, hold
Because I
on.
didn't feel like it.
Give me a moment. For some reason, OBS is just not detecting the PowerPoint anymore. Technical difficulties. I need a good technical difficulties slide. I feel like. What happened? The
Dante, did you bring enough toilet trips for the class?
Oh, okay. OBS just did its favorite thing where it resets the size of a transform to 0.
Oh, I love that. One of my
Reset
favorite
that,
things.
I think. I think that's what it did. I'm at a loss, actually. I don't know why it's behaving like this. But this is very crucial. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. We're back on track.
Woo!
Now I just need to motor to my slide. Oh, images. Okay. So another key component of the canvas is the image, the mighty image. This is the basis against which everything is built, that and text. So images, they look like this. There are several render options. There's simple, which displays the image as is. Based on the width and height settings that you specify, it'll squish and stretch if you make it, not its normal resolution. There's a checkbox you can have, which is render at, or preserve aspect ratio, rather. So if you specify this square to render at a width and height of 600 by 1200, it will just be a 600 by 600 square instead. It'll do the smaller size, I believe. So that's good. There's fill, which is used for like progress bars or radial fills. It'll like fill up the image based along the axis that you say you want from 0 to 1 based on a float value. And there's sliced, which is what I have in the example here, which allows you to dynamically cut shape and designate corners and frames. So if you've got a scalable UI, you probably want sliced unless it's anything other than a perfectly square square like what I have in my plugin because it's very minimalist. If you want rounded corners, you definitely want to use the sliced feature because then you can specify this is a corner, this is a corner, this is a corner, etc. And so it can stretch the content and always have the corners be the correct size and the frame be the correct size. So it's like a sprite sheet except for UI. To make a slice sprite, you go to the asset import settings, change it from single to multiple, enter the sprite editor and drag the green handles to where you want to slice. And like I said, it's a sprite sheet, but for UI. So you can also, if you don't want to drag the handles, you can also, behind my big bulbous head, there are text inputs where you can say like this many pixels from each edge, and it will figure it out. Does that make sense? Are you familiar with that already?
Yeah, I knew that already, so I don't know if it makes sense or not.
Cool, awesome. And finally, the last element I wanted to talk about is Text Mesh Pro TMP.
Pro!
It looks like this. So this was originally a thing you could buy on the asset store. It might have been free, but it came through the asset store. Then in 2017, this became the de facto text rendering solution for Unity. So the way you make a Text Mesh Pro asset is you right-click on your font file, you create Text Mesh Pro, font asset, and you're all set. Once again, my big fat head is in the way, but hold on, I'm gonna hide myself for a second here. Yeah. It's a pain, but it came to my rescue recently. So, like, for example, I'll get to this in a second, I guess. I turned this off for a second so I could show all the images. Text Mesh Pro font assets allow you to design a fallback font, which is very, 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 very handy. Say you're trying to localize for China, Japan, and Korea, or have Unicode symbols. You can specify a normal font, I say normal, English font, that you're used to, and then have a fallback font that has all your CJK or Unicode glyphs in it. And so if the original font can't find the glyphs that you're trying to render, it will reference the fallback font and render it from those instead. So in this second example I have, you can Frankenstein fonts together because this is actually two separate fonts. One of these is the MS-DOS terminal font, and the other is a pixel Japanese font that I found. The Japanese font is specified as a fallback of the MS-DOS terminal font, and it fits together looking pretty normal. You would never know necessarily that these are two separate fonts, and it means that I don't have to think about specifying a font every time I change language. I just say, here's the font atlas, please find what you're looking for. And unfortunately, and this is why you're going to find Text Mesh Pro antis, is there's no one-click solution for replacing old text components on the old way of doing things with new Text Mesh Pro components. You have to go in and tear everything out and replace them and update all your references, etc., etc. Well, good news, Lua. You're in luck because, in true Unity fashion, oops, hold on. Where are we? There we are.
Oh, apparently they can't hear me.
Oh, did I shut you off? I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Sorry. Your audio is linked to the people zone that I have a scene in my OBS where I have everybody who renders and you're in there.
I don't know if you heard that I'm a text mesh anti, but I'm a text mesh anti, and then I said I don't want to deal with all the options.
Yeah. You're in luck. So don't be fooled, right? Do not be fooled. Don't make this mistake. The options don't necessarily do anything. They're mostly for show. Parts of it straight up do not work. Again, this is the de facto solution.
These are talking points for my new text mesh anti platform.
Yeah. So the overflow option here doesn't do anything. You can set it to whatever you want. It does not change the behavior of the text at all.
I believe I've actually had this exact problem
Yeah,
moved to text mesh for overflow.
Yeah. This one doesn't work.
Cool.
I think the alignment stuff does work for the most part. And I haven't messed with too many of the other things, but I know overflow does not work. Yes, again, this has been the de facto go-forward solution for text rendering in Unity for 5 years. Parts of it don't work. And here are some great
now they're
forum
never gonna
posts
make it work.
from originally 2018, where a guy's asking, can somebody explain how to use TN Pro with a scroll rect overflow mode? Etc., etc. Guy who works at Unity says, the scroll rect overflow mode isn't working as intended and should be ignored until I get around to tweaking it. Blah, blah, blah. And so here's a post from 2022, earlier this year, where it says, wow, almost 4 years later I'm having this issue and it doesn't look like a thing has been done. Judging by this post, I'm confused why it isn't just removed if it doesn't work. Me, elated because I don't need to worry about total text content quantity when displaying summarized user input after having just found the scroll rect overflow option. So in theory, what I think this is supposed to do is if your text object is, or the text you put in is bigger than the width that you say, or height that you say your text can occupy, it will just automatically make a scroll bar for you, is what I would imagine this is supposed to do. And it would hide the scroll bar otherwise. But it doesn't.
Maybe.
Anyway, this guy goes on a rant about why is it in here. This was posted in April 19th, 2022. The original complaint was May 30th, 2018.
We love it. Unity's a great. I bet that guy doesn't even work there anymore.
He, I think, replied sometime a little bit earlier in the thread, but I'm not here to roast this guy. Whatever. I'm sure he doesn't have a great.
I wouldn't roast him. Except he said until I get around to tweaking it.
Yeah, setting yourself up to fail. I agree. So yeah, there are definitely parts of this that are not usable, so I'm not going to try and defend it or explain it. That's my understanding. Don't fall in this pitfall. Don't rely on this. Because it may just fail you. But for things like fallback fonts, I think it's very, very useful. A feature that I have in the pipeline for my heart rate plugin is Japanese localization, and we're like halfway there. And if I did not have the ability to have a fallback font like that, it would be very, very painful to... I'd have to know what language I'm in. I'd have to change out the font, depending on the language. If there were mixed characters, like, again, things displayed partially in English, I'd need to know what letter I'm trying to render and wrap that in a font tag, potentially. A whole mess, you know? Okay, so let's put it all together, right? Most of my UI uses these two components in alternating succession. You'll have... J Rhodes 27. Thank you for joining the Skeleton crew. What's the speech? What's the speech I always give? There's a saying in the afterlife, which is if you don't write rest in peace on your tombstone, you get drafted into the Skeleton War. You have voluntarily enlisted in the Skeleton Army, therefore saving a poor draftee from the ultimate fate of fighting in the Skeleton War. So I'm very, very thankful. Hi, Professor Tiberius. Your class, I think, is one door over. Your students are probably waiting for you. I am the professor today in this one. We're talking about Unity UI. You have come at a great time. So, again, most of my UI will be chaining together the two things I said were your best friends. You'll have a content size fitter at your top level. It will contain a layout group. The layout group's children will all have content size fitters of their own. And, you know, this is very, very apparent in my VTS heart rate thing, which I'll jump back to in a moment.
One of my biggest issues when I'm making UI is I frequently want to have text that is like let's say I have a button. I have a button, and obviously the button is a certain size.
Yes.
But I want the text to expand to all available space, but not the button. But I
You
don't
want
know what the available space
you
is.
want
'Cause I
the
want
text
the
to
whole screen
overflow.
to
You want the
scale.
text to overflow the button? Is that what you're saying? Or how do you mean?
I want the text box, not just the text itself, but the text box, because to fill all available space to it. But I want the button
Okay.
to basically
So
stay
let's
the same.
do a practical example. Let's do exactly what Lou has asked. Let me
Let's
show
do a
you.
practicum.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get rid of our text here. We're gonna make a UI. We're gonna make a button. In theory, I could have done a text mesh pro button. I'm gonna actually just tear it out and do it the way I've been setting everything up in my plugin, which so I had to assign these back the way they are. So currently, if I change my font here, I'm not sharing Unity. You're gonna have to look through the stream, if that's
Yeah.
alright. You're gonna be on a little bit of delay. So we're gonna do set our text, set our font, and our what's missing here? Why is this not rendering? It's because it's too small, probably. We can set this to stretch, like that, and get rid of these paddings on the side.
Sorry, I think I wasn't clear. Text unrelated to the button.
I don't understand then.
I have text next to a button.
Okay.
I've gotten a button with text in it.
Gotcha,
Doesn't
gotcha.
matter. The button itself is a set size. I want the text that's to the left of the button to expand. Like, let's for practical example.
Okay.
The top of a window. You know how there's an X at the very top right?
Yes.
And then the actual text of the window expands to be the whole top of the window. But I want the text itself to be in the center of that.
In the center of
Not
it.
the
Okay.
center of the window, but the center of the space available.
Let's see. That's a great question. Let's see. I've got a elements. Look how organized I am. Isn't it great? Scene up here. We're gonna go into one of my prefabs, which is the title bar. Kind of hard to see. Can I change the background? I'll just change the title text color to white, I guess, because I think this is kind of what you're asking for. This is a prefab I have. Ooh, it just updated every instance of this across my entire project. That's fine. That's cool. That's cool. Okay,
Hope
so
you
this
use version control.
yeah, exactly. So this is kind of what you're talking about, right? You've got a bar. You want to have a button at the corner, and you've got text that is supposed to fill all
The
remaining
rest of
space.
the space. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So how would one do that? Because the way I've done it is knowing that I've got things of fixed size. It's very easy for me to
Yeah.
manually position these.
Yeah.
What you could do, I think, is give this a horizontal layout group, like such,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can do child force expand width and height, and then no, but then we also want to control the width of the child, I think, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
But if you do that, then the buttons will be it'll be evenly
Exactly.
spaced, right? It's the problem.
Yes.
Hmm.
You are seeing the crux of my issue.
Yes. Okay. If you prefer to not use a layout group here, I think you can do this with anchoring. Let's do with anchoring. So forget all of that. That's a whole load of hogwash that I just showed you. You've got your text here, and you don't want it to be a fixed size, right? But what you do want is for it to stretch. And so what you can do is you can make this anchor points of 0 and max of 1. So each side of the thing, we're going to calculate offsets from each side. And our pivot point is going to be 0.5 in the center. I think is what we want. I think? No, that's actually not correct either. This is actually more of a difficult problem than I was anticipating, and you're putting me on the spot, which is very good, because this is a very common situation I would think you'd want. So
I've tried to do it dozens of times.
yeah. Let me think what the cool, correct way to do this would be. Because you can have it stretch like such, and then if we change the width here, the text should also. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna do like 30, or I guess in this case 40, because I like having my 10 pixel padding. 40. So we've got our text its anchored points are 0 and 1 on the canvas, so that, or on its parent container, so that's each side. We're specifying an offset from each side, which is good. And now we have our buttons, which we want to also stay in a relative position. It's like this tooltip button, instead of specifying a fixed position, we would do anchor of 1 and 1, like that, and the position would be that. We know that the width of this is 30, so we're going to say a offset of -15, puts it back in the corner, and similarly, we probably don't need to do this for this one because it's just the first element here. Okay, so now we can make this squash and stretch, and it works like you'd expect. I think that's what you wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to reiterate how I did that, and let me add a background that's not invisible, so it's a little bit easier to see the thing moving. So we've got a button, we've got some text, and we have another button. And so the way that I went about accomplishing the task that Lua had, which is you want a button in one corner, text to fill all of the remaining space, and the button in the other corner. We have our panel overall. This itself, I don't think has any kind of layout group or anything attached. We have our button on the leftmost side. We know how big it is. It's a fixed size because it's a button. So we can say that the anchor for this one is the leftmost side, 0, 0. Its pivot is its center, and therefore we want to offset it 15 pixels, which is half of its width, from that anchor point. This makes it fit nicely around in the corner. Then we have our text, which has its anchors on both sides so that it stretches as the canvas stretches. We offset it 40 pixels, which is the 30 from the button plus 10 from each side, which gives it a 40 pixel buffer on each end. And we set its anchors to 0 and 1, like I said. Pivot can still stay in the center. And I'm realizing now that this kind of goes contra what I was describing before, where the offsets are measured relative to the anchor and pivot. Because if this was measuring from 0x to 0.5x here, you'd have a much larger space. But I think that's because the mode is stretch. When you do anchors of 0 and 1 like this, it understands intuitively that you want to just stretch to each side. And so the position becomes a buffer instead of... Oh, sorry, that's what it is. That's my stream of consciousness narrative. You'll have a pause Y, because we have our anchor, min and max are the same. But if I were to make these different, you'd have an offset. So when they're the same, when you have a fixed single point, like 1, 1, on your Y, which is just the top, you specify your position from it. But when you have separate, like a 0, 1, you specify a padding on each side, if that makes sense. That might not make sense. Kind of stream of consciousness, but this is a very good question. Anyway, by allowing us to have anchors on each side, we can then have our text object scale to meet the size of whatever its container is. Now, if we made it really, really wide, we can see that the text box with its yellow border is also very wide, and then the button is all the way at the end. Because we know, once again, its width, we can set its anchor to the end of the screen, and we can do all of our calculations accordingly. It's 15 in from the right, so we do negative 15 because it's a width of 30, half of its width, and its anchor is the rightmost side. Does this answer your question, Lua?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Let's go. Write a driver that mathematically recalculates the anchor. Yeah, you can do that. Can you use HTML or CSS in Unity? Ty, I think the new UI toolkit lets you do that, and that's not what I'm talking about today. So back to my slide deck. Or actually, while I'm in here, not Discord. There we go. While we're in here, I will revert everything I've done to this prefab, because I've done terrible things to it that have probably fucked up my project irreparably, but that's why it's a prefab. That's the beauty of it. So we'll go back to my primary scene
You
here.
can mess up everything all at once. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, but you only have to fix it in one place, is the best part. So we go back to sample scene, which is what I've named my default scene. Don't save this. So we go to our canvas here, and I'll fire this up at runtime. This is probably gonna make me like blush now on camera because I forgot if I have a prefab for this. Oh, and I made it all weird sized too. Let's do this the normal aspect ratio, 400 by 600, like such. And now we're gonna go to the scene view. Oh, let me expand this first. So my custom parameters here on my viewport content output parameters, these guys. This is a top level object that is a content size fitter and a vertical layout group. It has a title, like what we were just messing with. So this is the title bar prefab. Underneath it, it has another vertical layout group with a content size fitter. And so this has all of the custom parameters, which themselves, I believe, are also vertical layout groups. No, okay, these I just positioned manually. That's fine. So these are just a known height and width. That's fine. So the parameters are a vertical layout group. Here, each custom parameter gets added to the list. It makes the thing expand, which is great. And so the way that this works is now we've got our list. Here, the title object is the first item in the list. The actual list is the second item in the list, so the title bar and the list are offset from each other in 10 pixel kind of spacing. The list can be as long as it needs to be because we have a content size fitter all the way back up at the top. So the list continues to expand and makes the container expand, and it looks great. And then in the game, you can just scroll, and it all works like you'd think. So you just chain these things together, the layout groups and the content size fitters, in perpetuity, and it makes things snap together nicely. Now, one cool thing I was able to do recently is have these be collapsible. If I didn't do the trick I'm about to teach you, where I have it recalculate the size before drawing, this would be very, very jittery. It would make the whole canvas panic every time you collapse and redraw. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Back to the task at hand. Wow. Yeah, okay, so back to our slide deck. Pro tip about putting all this together. Call this function, layoutrebuilder.forceRebuildLayoutImmediate, and call it on the root object that you want to recalculate the size of. So anytime you have a dynamic element that is being resized by, while also thinking that it should have its size driven by a content fitter or a layout group, you'll want to call this function, which tells those components to immediately recalculate their size. Otherwise, it will do it at the end of the current render frame, which is not desirable. Very helpful function.
And that is a script you write in?
What do you mean?
Where do you put that?
So as an example, I will go to my VS Code. Where do I call this? In my UI manager, which is another process I'll talk about, in my update function here, I have a boolean that I check if I've requested a rebuild, and this will rebuild each of the large content tabs that I have if I've requested a rebuild. It will then also resize the size of my scroll view to the size of the current tab on the screen, which is very
So
good.
you shouldn't call this like every frame. This is a...
No, I think it's very render intensive. You probably could for a thing like I'm doing, because all it's doing, every single core is just dedicated to doing some math and rendering the UI. But typically, whenever you are about to do something, like, hold on, I have a another function here. Collapsible button. Collapse button. This
What
guy
is a layout rebuilder?
It's just a static object that is in the, I believe, Unity
Oh,
UI
okay,
package.
it's a Unity thing.
This is a Unity thing. I did not invent this. Layout
Okay.
rebuilder, force rebuild. So there are docs on this as well. Like if I jump to this, it's part of the UI. And then you can also mark things for rebuild, which means Unity will get around to it when it gets around to it. But you can force it to do it if you want. So like, for example, I have the collapse button that we just saw I was able to use to collapse my list. I believe in here.
I am curious if you would achieve the same thing if when you went to collapse, you just marked everything for rebuild.
Perhaps. I don't see any reason to leave it a chance. I don't trust Unity to do things correctly. I need to tell it what to do. So like here's my collapse function. When I collapse, it tells the root element which I've assigned. So like you've got your prefab, which is the title bar, and it has a reference to the thing that's containing it, which is the root element. I tell that root element to recalculate its size when we collapse, and then I do this. We request a rebuild of the content tab that it's in as well. So we do 2 rebuilds every time I collapse. The actual element itself and the thing containing it. And that's how I use this to have a nice, smooth, clean UI experience. Back to the slide deck. We're almost there. We're over halfway through. Do not be fooled.
She's thinking with portals.
Yeah, do not be fooled. This warning that you told me about, Lua, the parent has a type of layout group component. A child of layout group should not have a content size fitter. It should only be driven by the layout group. That is hogwash. I have never observed that to be the truth. I don't know why it tells you to do this. I'm guessing it's a performance thing. If you're building a hobbyist app like you and I are, I don't think this matters very much. If I'm completely wrong, you're free to, throw shit at my head or boo me or whatever. But in my experience, you can chain these things together and it will work. You might just need to tell it to rebuild at the end of your process, because otherwise it will try and do them in sequential order, which may or may not get desirable results. But it's a warning you can ignore.
Woo!
Chapter 2, and this is
that was all chapter 1.
much shorter chapter here. This is just design considerations. So
I was like, oh, we're done!
We're almost done. So thank God for nested prefabs. As I was just kind of demonstrating Unity, these were actually only introduced into Unity as recently as 2018.3. Before that, you could not
I
nest the
will
prefab.
say, though,
Yeah?
I say all that, but my company's engine doesn't even have nested prefabs, so...
It's a good feature.
No! No, yeah, we had them and we got rid of them.
Got rid of them. Spitting in
Because
God's
we moved
face,
to new
really.
ones, they just haven't been added to the new ones yet.
So I think the point of this chapter is less about what the booleans and things do, what the fields do, and the actual objects, and more the way that I consider building UI. This is the approach that I take.
My company uses their own custom engine.
Yeah, don't make Lua dox yourself, please.
I mean, it's
So
true.
these are the ways that I think about building a UI when I have a new project going on. Toggling an alpha between 0 and 1 on a canvas group lets you show and hide a tree of elements with minimal performance hit, but the size is not 0. When you make something invisible, Hawkbar, the size isn't 0. So it will still think, like if I... Hold on, I'm going to try this right now. We're trying so many things. So, okay.
Yeah,
So I've got my list here, right? And the thing I want to be able to collapse is all of this nonsense right here. So like let's add a canvas group. I didn't talk about canvas groups, but these are kind of useful. They let you override some of the settings of the canvas that they're a child of. So like if you wanted to have a thing that you did not block raycasts because you wanted clicks to pass through it, was not interactable, you can set these to false. If I set this alpha to 0, oh, wait, hold on. Parameters is what I meant to set this to. Canvas group. So, alpha of 0, as you can see, it still thinks it's got a huge amount of content to render. So, doing that would not be sufficient for toggling the size of this on and off for the sake of a list item, where you've got a scroll bar. So, a cool fact about the way I've got my plugin set up, actually, though, is that all of my tabs here actually have their... they're all constantly always on. And when you go from, say, the Profiles tab, which currently has an alpha of 1 and is interactable, to the Output tab, now the Profiles tab has an alpha of 0 and is no longer interactable. So it's still there, and any scripts that I have are still running their update functions in it. But I can click through it, and it's not intercepting my clicks. It's not visible. When I go back, it hides everything else, and it works like you'd expect. Yeah. Okay. So, the power of nested prefabs is you can say a button is a button, unless you specifically say otherwise. You can get very consistent behavior across all of your UI elements in this way. It creates a uniform look and feel, which I believe is a good UX. Though, as you can tell with all of my UI being some form of square or primitive shape, I'm not a designer by any means. I am an engineer, and I have engineer brain. So, like, here's an example of the thing we were just looking at. It has a nested prefab, which is a title bar across the top. The title bar itself has a nested prefab of a button, which is a variant of the normal button that I have for collapsing, and a variant of the normal button that I have, which is for tooltips. Each of these are their own prefab. Then, underneath the title bar, which is a prefab, I've got a panel, which has a button prefab, which is this one right here. Some text, which doesn't need to be a prefab, but it could be if you wanted to have the same font in every single instance of your text. And then I've got a password input field, which itself, if I expanded this, would be an input field and another button as 2 more nested prefabs. And the status indicator is a 3rd prefab. What this means is that anytime I want to say, change my buttons from being square to having rounded sliced edges, like in the image slicing we were talking about before, I simply need to go to my button prefab and change the sprite there, and every button in my entire project that uses this prefab will now have the new graphic applied. If you needed to add a script to them, say you wanted all of your buttons to suddenly squish and squash and stretch when you click on them, like, for example, going back to here, I have a script on my buttons that makes them squash and stretch, like such. I was able to take my button prefab, add this script to them, and now every button in my entire app, unless I specifically specify otherwise, has this behavior. Every single button. All of them, unless you specifically specify otherwise. So I only had to add a script to one place, and all of the behavior, look and feel was improved dramatically across every instance. Again, you probably know this, though, I'm assuming. This is not necessarily news to you. But it's a very good way to stay organized. Every component should be its own prefab. And the other design paradigm that I follow very, very strictly is the singleton.
I love a singleton when it comes to UI.
Yeah, very important. So I think it's a good plan to wrap all of UI object references in a single place in your scene, and they all route through your UI manager. So this allows stateful information to be stored or shared across UI elements very easily. They don't need to talk to each other, they just need to talk to the central manager. And it allows for easier separation of form, which is the UI, and function, which is the game logic, because you don't need to have all of your buttons tied directly into game code. You can do your UI manager handling all of the talking to game code, and it will just pipe the relevant information over to the UI elements as need be. Singletons are an anti-pattern. Programmers who have never had to manage a game system in Unity, yeah? And so this also, as I said, reduces the need for UI elements to point to each other. You don't need to have every page in your book know about every other page. They each just need to tell the UI manager, hey, I'm activating now, and the UI manager will know, okay, got it, that means I deactivate every other page right now, and do whatever other cleanup you need to do. Keeping the singleton as stateless as possible as well. I mean, if you can help it, but games are inherently very stateful programs. There's very limited case where you want, like, a true functional state machine, or sorry, not state machine, a true functional manager for your game, I think, because state is important. If you can keep things as stateless as possible, it's good, but something needs to keep track of where you are, needs to keep track of what you're doing, what your context is, etc., etc. And so, again, another good thing about having your singleton for your UI is if you, say, make a terrible breaking change on a script, you only need to reassign references in one place, which is your manager. You don't need to go find every instance of text that every button references and stitch those back together. Though if you are using nested prefabs, it's less of a pain than you might think. So, like, for example, here's the UI manager that I have in my plugin. You'll notice there's a lot of cases where there's this big bolded white text. That means that it is something that is differing from the prefab instance of this. I have a prefab of the UI manager, and then I make one in the scene, and it has references to all of my scene objects in it. So this is where the rubber hits the road. We have our list of different tabs you can be on. They're indexed by an enum that I specify, and that corresponds to a physical component in the canvas. And so the UI manager is the sole object that knows how many different menus there can be. It knows how to navigate between them, and it doesn't require each menu to know about the other menus. It also is capable of dynamically resizing the scroll view, and has a reference to the pop-up, which is a very, very useful function that I've got in my code. So I'll go back to Unity for a second here. So, like, if I do a tooltip, it makes a pop-up appear. This is something that I do in a lot of places from a lot of different pieces of code, and so instead of having every single script that needs to call a pop-up have a reference to the physical pop-up object, they all just tell UI manager.instance.show pop-up, and pass in the relevant parameters like title, text, and some button options. So like I can show that in here, in my VS Code. Or way I would do this in my tooltip button. I have a script that is the button that shows every tooltip, and you just choose an enum for what tooltip you're going to show. But basically, all you have to do is call UI Manager instance, show popup, say the name and body, and if you want to pass in an optional list of buttons, those all have constructors where you do the same thing, name, color, and the function that happens when you click on the button. And you can list these on and on and on. You could have like 5 of these because they're a parameter option. And the show popup is a punch through to the actual reference of the popup and passes those parameters along. So now everything that needs to call popup can just reference the singleton. The singleton can decide what this means, and I don't need to worry about summoning a popup in 25 different ways across 25 different references. It is unified behavior, all calls back to the singleton, gets on a very nice look and feel, reduces your headache, etc., etc.
I will never like seeing all of your thises.
Okay, that's fine. You're not me. You don't have to.
Sorry, it's unrelated.
And so finally, last cool tip I have is you can actually get quite a lot out of Unity events. I keep talking about having everything be decoupled and you don't want your elements to reference each other. But inside the context of like an individual UI module, it may be desirable for it to have pointers to other pieces of its componentry. So for an example of what a UI event is, I'll go back once again to Unity. Let's go to our scene here. What do I want to show? Let's go back to the tried and true Pulsoid, if I can type, Pulsoid input module that I have. So we open up this prefab. So an example of a Unity event is like on your button class here. You can have like on click, or in my case I have a extension for my button, which I can also specify like on pointer down and on pointer up. If you wanted to, you could have a like event here and say that, okay, when this is called, when you on pointer down, let's do collapse, and then we tell it to toggle collapse with a status of true, hard-coded true. This is a Unity event, and so every time I click on this button, it will execute this code against this object. I set these usually up programmatically, but you can also do them via the inspector if you're visually oriented. And so you're not just limited to the kinds of events that Unity exposes to you here. You can write your own, no problem. And the way you do that is basically learning what Unity can and can't do. Unity cannot serialize generics, which is when you pass in a type as a parameter. Except for list, it knows how to do that for some reason to the editor. So if you wanted to make a Unity event that takes in a parameter of type, like, I don't know, string and also Boolean, if you just said, you know, public Unity event string Boolean my event, you would not be able to get that exposed to the inspector. Unity would not cooperate with you, and you'd think, oh, well, I can't use this Unity event. But what you can do is make a concrete implementation by simply extending Unity event and having no other relevant information in your class definition. So, Lua, I was talking to you earlier today about how I've got a function in one of the projects that I'm working on that is, when you drag and drop files into the game window, it gets the path of those files and can do something with them. So I made my own Unity event here, where it gets in a list of strings, which is the file paths, and the vector2 position on the screen where that drop happened. And all it does is extend Unity event, and I can now have public drop files event on drop files, and it will show up in my inspector, like such.
Do you have to define this in a particular place, or just
No,
wherever?
this can be wherever. I usually define
wow.
these in my singleton classes, but you can put them wherever.
So every was that a button specifically? Every button will show all Unity events?
No. Perhaps I'm explaining poorly. So buttons by default have I think they just have on click, right? This is a Unity event that accepts an argument of type pointer data, I believe. It doesn't tell you that here, but it does. So you can make this call a void function, no problem. So like a game object, You can say name, and in here you can also specify if the function you're trying to call takes in parameters and the event does not supply parameters, you can specify a hard-coded value here like new name. So now every time you click on this button, it will change the name of itself to new name. This is an example of a Unity event. It's like a
Right,
delegate.
yeah.
So
That I got. What about this new one?
So okay. So I'm losing my voice because I haven't spoken or streamed in 2 weeks.
Oh no.
That's fine. So like an example would be this extended button class I have, which is a thing that lets me do animation curves for squash and stretch, play a noise if I wanted to when you click on them. So this is a extension. It overlays on top of the existing button. I have extended that on click to have on pointer down and on pointer up as 2 discrete events. They happen separately at different firing intervals. So for example, I really only ever want the event for a click to happen when you release the pointer, and only if that pointer releases over the button that you're clicking on. So like if I were to click on this button, move my cursor, and then release, I don't actually want it to count as a button click. The user meant to click somewhere else. They didn't want to actually do the thing. No need to fire that. So in my extended button class, I will open this up in VS Code. This has, I don't think I defined custom events for this. These are just Unity events because they're parameterless. They don't take in an argument, which Unity is fine with. But you could do like something like this. This serializable public what's it complaining about? Extends. This isn't Java. Pretty sure it extends, right? What's it complaining about? Oh, and I need, sorry. Public class click event, that's what I need. And it is colon. This isn't Java.
Yeah, it's a colon.
I flip between doing JavaScript, Python, R, and Java for my day job.
R.
Yeah, because I deal with
What is
actuaries.
R?
I deal with accountants for my day job, and they
I
write
don't
code
even know
in
what R is.
Yeah. So that's fun. So I always forget syntax every single day. Okay, so we have a class like this. You don't need to put any content in it. And then I could change this to be a click event on pointer down. Now we'll go back to Unity and look at the inspector.
I'm assuming the only reason you do this instead of making a normal delegate is to have it show up in the UI.
Yes. If you're a drag and drop kind of person, you do this. Sorry, I have a compilation issue because I invoke my thing is down here. So let's just give this an argument to be happy with. 0. Back to Unity. Unity will now compile. A lot of people really like the inspector, so I feel like it's worth mentioning how you can connect UI elements in this way. So now on pointer up and on pointer down. What's it complaining about? Oh, okay. This is a hackneyed example, a doomed example, because I've got compile issues now that I've changed the type there. I should have just made a new public click event, new event, like that. And now, I'm just not going to complain about anything, right? We're going to have a third thing in the dropdown. Unity is recompiling. Okay, are we good? Are we happy? Let's find out. Okay, cool. New event. So it says it's a new event. Takes in a vector 2. You can assign stuff from here. And then creepily, thank you, if I were to have not done it that way and instead tried to do vector 2, new event. Only thing that changed is that I didn't make a concrete class here. When I go back into MS Paint, but Unity, when this recompiles, new event is going to be gone. Tragic. It's there. You can access it from programs, but you can't access it from the inspector because Unity does not know how to serialize objects that have generics unless it is of type list. They min-maxed into the one thing. So yeah, if you like connecting things by connecting the dots in the inspector, you can do it that way. If you're like me you might prefer to have things done programmatically. So like for my example, my collapse button here, I programmatically assign functions. Like I get the button, I say on pointer up, we add a listener, and I do a inline function describing what I want to happen when you click. And that's that. And then I don't have to deal with the UI ever, which means that if I lose reference or update references or things like that, I don't have to worry about reassigning them later. I think this is cleaner, but this is a more engineer-oriented way of doing things. So of course I'm going to like it. Aura Mara, welcome to the chat. Isn't that pirate? I don't know what that means. Like Python?
They said when you said you write
Oh,
R.
oh, pirate. No, we are building a our code is a TypeScript wrapper that can execute R as an engine because we deal with actuaries, and we need to deploy against AWS. All right, so that was actually it. The exposure of Unity events to the inspector, so you can plug and play visually, was my last big tip. Here's a cool way to get all of your UI events hooked together when you're describing your own things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Lua, the floor is now yours. Time for questions, time for chat questions. I hope any of this was useful. I realize you're kind of a veteran, so you probably knew a lot about this. I don't know if I answered any of your questions or helped make this any clearer for you, but this is what I know.
Yeah,
this is
I got questions answered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
This stream was my request, so
that's why I'm
thank
really
you
concerned
for-
about if
for
I just told you everything
indulging
you already
me.
knew.
Huh?
If I told you things you already knew and it was your request, it's a big waste of time then, isn't it? Like, do you feel like
I
you got
mean, I
something
knew
out
you
of
were
this?
gonna tell me things I already knew. My questions were very specific, so specific that a stream would be unnecessary. But I figured, here's what I figured. I was like, maybe I'm so misguided I don't know what I don't know. So let's just start from square one.
That's a good process. Deep ignorance is a very good philosophical concept. You can probably hear it. I am actively losing my voice.
Oh no,
Which is very
go to
funny.
sleep or stop talking.
No.
Ginger tea or something.
I'll
What do
be
people
fine.
do? I just let it ride.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So yeah, if there's any further questions from you, I'm happy to field them. If the audience has any questions, I can hop back into Unity and try and mess around with stuff. Your question about how do I get a center object to expand, very thought-provoking, I have to say.
Yeah, I think that I'm realizing that the things that I thought would be super easy to do are actually just extremely difficult to do in Unity.
there's also that. There's also that.
I think that mostly what I learned was, oh, I'm just asking for unreasonable things.
Nueos asks, are there any UI-specific things to keep in mind if we introduce dependency injection? I don't see how those two concepts are related whatsoever. If you can elaborate, assuming that's an actual question and not just nonsense, yeah, I'd be happy to try and figure that out with you, but I don't see how dependency injection, which for those who don't know, is when you build code in such a way that it accepts things in an interface level, which is, and a code interface, for folks who don't know, is when you describe properties and functions you can call against an object without actually having any concrete logic underneath them. So many things can inherit an interface or implement an interface, and the code that's calling it will just know, I can expect there to be a... Oh, thanks, Ty. I appreciate it. So like a code that calls an interface knows I can expect there to be an add function on this collection, but it doesn't know how that function works. So a good example of interfaces would be like a list. You can have a enumerable, a list, an array list, a hash map, these kind of things, and they all implement a like collections interface. So dependency injection is when you tell the developer, here's my library, pass in whatever you want as your implementation of your collection. The code just knows it needs to have an add method, right? And so you can inject dependencies that way. Makes things very testable because you can inject dummy dependencies when you're building a unit test, etc., etc. Okay, Noeos, I'll get to you in a second. I was real excited about the development when I was making a scripted object event system. Oh yeah, because you're talking about how in 2020 plus you can serialize generics. That's very, very cool. But we're not using that because I don't trust Unity as far as I can throw it post going public. Penguin says that was very informative, learned a bunch of stuff that I had no idea on the function. Mostly use trial and error until it all fits. That is the tried and true way to do it. My
That's what I
best
do.
my best aspiration for this PowerPoint was to give you guidance on being able to guess what might happen when you mess around, so you can make informed messing around decisions and get there a
Tom,
little bit faster.
it is an unreasonable number of hours I have spent
Yeah.
just checking those 6 toggles
Yeah.
on vertical layout.
Yeah. Don't mess with them. Just pretend they don't exist. It's fine. Okay. Noeos now says, I was thinking you can inject pre-made UI elements at interface level. That means the UI may need to be built more generic. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if this is what you're talking about. Back to my code. I've got, again, on my UI manager, I've got this pop-up, show pop-up, and the last argument here is a pop-up option of type params, which means you can just have as many of these as you want. So like a good example of this would be here. Very complex inline definition of calling the pop-up here. We have our title, we have our body, and we have 2 buttons that happen in this pop-up. First one is green, says yes, does some stuff when you click it. Other one is gray, basically it's a cancel. And so I think what you're saying is as long as you adhere to the interface of this pop-up definition, you'd be good. Because what the pop-up itself, we go all the way to the pop-up here, is doing on the show is it takes in a list of options and it will create a button based on its reference to what the button prefab is. For every one of those options, it will populate a horizontal layout group with these buttons and make sure that they have a listener programmatically assigned to them for the option callback that we specify. It sets the color, fills in the text, sets the callback. So you could, I guess, have dependency injection at this level. Anything that inherits this option interface, you'd be fine. I think. I think that's what you're asking. I don't actually know. I'm not sure. Okay. An interface is a promise that there will be functions with these names and inputs on this class, but the class can... Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think I figured them out eventually, but my brain does not want to recall that information willingly. Trial and error still really is the solution, but again, I really just hope I can give you some guidance on what these may or may not do, so you can think intelligently, guess intelligently.
Yeah, I apparently all my problems are coming from the fact that I wanted to actually scale. How dare I?
It's definitely doable. It's definitely doable. Though working with a fixed resolution size is typically a good bet, I think.
Unfortunately, not an option. But, the funny thing is that something that I found work for me was something we didn't say.
Go ahead.
Didn't talk about.
Talk
And
about
I
it.
don't think it's correct, but I heard this from someone else, so it didn't even come from my brain.
Okay.
Which was that if I want an object, well, to be fair, I think this was before I realized. Okay, did we talk about the canvas scaler? We did.
Yes.
Maybe we didn't.
We did. I can motor back to it.
Because you pretty much always want it to be scale with screen size, right?
Yeah, unless you don't, but yeah. Let me...
Because I think by default that's not the default option.
It should be. It should... Oh, actually, hold on. Is it constant pixel size by default? I am so used to making new garbage in Unity that it is maybe second hand to me that I just know to change it from constant pixel size to scale screen size, 800 by 600, and then, oh yeah, and then I set the match to 0.5. I forgot that these are not default. Shit, I'm a very bad teacher. So I forget what the match does. I guess it says here, determines if the scaling is using the width or height as a reference or a mix in between. That's a really bizarre way to do this. But basically, when I set this to 0.5, it means that it is factoring in both of these when I am resizing. So like I will put some text right in the dead center, size 22. In our game here, if we do free aspect, and
Why is 0.5 not the default?
I have no idea. So like by comparison, if we set this to 0, it looks like that, which I think is not great. It looks like it's moving down vertically. And if we set it to 1, it only moves horizontally. But if we set it to 0.5, it moves both horizontally and vertically, just to maintain itself in the same relative position that it has been in. Which is like, if you think about the screen canvas again as being 0, 0 to 1, 1, when you set it to 0.5 like this, it'll make sure it tries to keep that same place in terms of percentage. And then it's doing it against a reference resolution of, 800 by 600. So we did like 400 by 400. It's going to think it's a square. When it's not a square, it will behave accordingly. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot that the canvas scaler by default is not this. It is so muscle memory to me at this point that I do scale screen size and then set this to 0.5. I never use these other options. I don't know why you'd want to do that.
Yeah. I remember a lot of heartache was saved when I realized that was changing it to scale with screen size was an option.
Yeah, and then you can do constant pixel size, which is what it says on the tin. And constant physical size, I don't deal with this ever, because I don't know what my DPI is of my screen. So, tough. Oops. Alright. Hey Fuba, you are just in time for class to be over. I think I'm going to wrap it up just about now, because we've been at it for precisely 2 hours, a very, very long lecture. The exam will be on Friday, so prepare your notes, prepare your questions. Office hours Wednesdays and Fridays, Lua. I had some higher ups demand a weird specific thing. I mean, like, yeah, if you're building for a specific platform and a specific screen, all of this goes out the window, because you don't need to worry about it being scalable. You know what your hardware is going to be like. You're fine. Oh, a fun DPI thing that's in Unity, by the way, that I learned about by having software shipped in Unity. Unity does a thing where it writes to the Windows registry with the last recorded window size that it was running at, right? Which is great. So if you rescale your thing to be, half screen size, next time you boot it up, it won't be full screen again. Windows will remember what size it's going to be. Awesome. There is a bug if you go from a 4K monitor to a non-4K monitor, where Unity, I don't know what it's doing, but will basically have the size of the screen every time it goes from 4K to not 4K. So if you launch the app in 4K and bring it over to your normal monitor, Unity will have the size of it. I think I have this right. Maybe it's the other way around, where when you bring it to 4K, it has the size. And it will keep doing this forever and ever and ever. So if you got an app like mine, where you originally tell it to always be this fixed size and don't allow the user rescaling, you have a problem, because Windows is going to rescale it and the user can't make it the right size again.
Oops.
This, I believe, is an issue with how Unity calculates DPI on 4K and above monitors, and so it is just very, very confused about the size of the resolution it's actually dealing with. My solution was to use a solution from Denshi, actually, which lets the user scale the window but only within the fixed resolution that we specify. So they can't just pull arbitrarily. They can drag the corner, and it will always stay the same aspect ratio, but they can adjust the size. Yeah. So, fun. Thank you very much for that, Denji. It came in clutch. So, DPI and Unity, you don't want to mess with it, is my final assessment. And yeah, that brings us to time. Lua, do you have any closing remarks? Any further questions you want to talk about here on stream? Otherwise, I'm going to go... class will be dismissed. I'm going to go make dinner. I'll probably play more Splatoon. And that's going to be it for me.
No. Please go make dinner. I'm now going to go write a Node server, so...
Oh, that's exciting.
No, I'm in physical pain. I've been putting this off for so long.
Nueo says the U in DPI stands for useful in Unity. But there... Oh. I get it. Because there is no U in DPI, because it's not useful in Unity. Gotcha. Very funny. Alright, I think I can hear the bell ringing. Class is dismissed. I will catch you all again probably next Sunday. It's not going to be this Saturday, that's for sure. I don't know what I'll be doing. I'll probably be playing Freedom Planet, a wonderful video game that's coming out this week that is a
Isn't it a
Homage to
spin-off
Sonic
of
the
Freedom
Hedgehog.
Lady?
There are multiple Freedom Ladies in Freedom Planet. The entire main
Nice.
cast are Freedom Ladies. It's very exciting.
Incredible.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's a Sonic homage game. The sequel is coming out. Can't wait. That'll probably be my next stream because I don't have any programming projects currently that I'm allowed to stream.
Big
So
mood.
I don't have updates to a library to make. My plugin is doing swimmingly, and there are no new features I need to add. It's perfect. Yeah, next time the VOD for this will be on my channel, obviously, and I'll be also uploading the full thing to my YouTube tomorrow. So if you want to catch it, feel free. If you want to ask me questions, hit me up on my Twitter. I am at Taro, the spoonerism of my name. You can see in the bottom left over there. Hit me up, ask me questions anytime. I'm very, very happy to help. And that's going to do it. Lua, do you have any streams coming up that you want to plug, or are we just done here?
I guess the only thing I want to plug is that on Tuesday, I will be finally starting to rig Belindra's live 2D
Wow.
model. Who she's been drawing. I've been working with her, and she's been drawing it for many, many, many months now, and it's finally happening.
That's where. Oh, right, I have to raid somebody. I forgot. I'm so hung up in this, like, classroom aesthetic that I forgot that you can raid people. Let's see. Let's find out. Who's even online? We could go send everybody to Farah, I think. She's playing Kingdom Hearts, which is exciting.
She sure is. Her favorite video game.
Is it really?
Pretty much.
Alright, so now class, Programming and User Interface Design 101 is dismissed. Make sure you get on your way to Creative Writing and Fanworks. I'm going to say it's a 3000 level class. Kingdom Hearts, probably. Creative Writing, perhaps even a grad class. So enjoy the elective. Go be nice to Farah. I'm going to go make burgers, I think. Bonus,
The
Sarah.
raid message is...
Go ahead. Whatever you want.
Fuck you, Farrah. No.
You said it, not me. I'm not liable. But yeah, be nice to her. She's great. She just got a brand new PC, so she can stream really good.
She could finally stream video games. She used to not even be able to use VTube Studio, really. It was
Very
really
cool.
chugging.
Very cool. When you walk away, you can't hear me say, please serialize. Couldn't think of how to finish that. All right, class is
Yeah,
dismissed.
there you go. That's the stream message,
Ti-
the serialized thing.
Time to go eat. Bonus era. Good evening, good night, everybody. I will catch you all next time.